Robot versus Predator. It sounds like the title of a movie, but the Burmese python infestation in Florida is far from a work of fiction. Wildlife biologists in the Sunshine State are deploying a new weapon in an effort to eradicate this threat to the Everglades.
Nobody expected the Florida Python War to involve $4,000 robot bunnies, but desperation leads to wild inventions. These machines were built to be perfect prey, from their body heat to their unique musk.
Researchers have developed robot rabbits. They're lifelike decoys that look, move, even smell like real marsh bunnies.
But the swamp doesn't follow human rules, and the project quickly spiraled into a disaster that cost millions. So, here's the deal. The results of this experiment didn't just shock the scientists, they revealed a secret social calendar that the snakes have been using to hide for years. You won't believe how a failing robot army accidentally hacked the entire invasion. Coiling nightmare from the jungle. When the glades begin to vanish at sunrise, the Florida Everglades glows like a living mirror. You see, it's a world of shimmering sawgrass over slow-moving water where herons stand as still as statues. Yet beneath that staggering beauty lies one of the most devastated ecosystems in America. For decades, this vast wilderness, a shallow river of grass spanning 1.5 million acres, has been under a silent and coiling attack. The invader isn't a chemical spill or a new development. It's alive, it's hungry, and it is proven to be, to put it mildly, unstoppable. The Burmese python, a predator born in the jungles of Southeast Asia, has turned Florida's wetlands into its own personal empire. The thing nobody tells you is that this invasion wasn't an act of nature. It was a human mistake. Born from the exotic pet trade in the 1980s and 90s, baby pythons were sold as harmless curiosities. They were glossy, beautifully patterned, and small enough to rest in a child's hands. But those pets grew, and they grew fast. Within a few short years, many reached staggering lengths of 15 to 20 feet. That is long enough to span the width of a two-car garage. They became powerful enough to overpower a deer or even a 6-foot alligator. Owners who were completely unprepared for a monster in their guest room began releasing them into canals and swamps. Then in 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida with winds over 150 miles per hour. The storm destroyed countless reptile breeding facilities, releasing an unknown number of pythons into the wild. Those escaped snakes seeded the population that would later engulf the Everglades. For a python, this new world was paradise. The Everglades offered warmth, endless water, and most importantly, prey that had never evolved to fear a giant constrictor. With no natural predators of their own and the shocking ability to lay up to 100 eggs at a time, their population exploded. Biologists now estimate that tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, roam South Florida. What they have done to the food web is catastrophic. In areas where pythons are dominant, there has been a near-total disappearance of raccoons, opossums, and marsh rabbits. We are talking about populations dropping by over 90%. One large python was found with a whole adult deer inside its stomach. In another famous incident, a python was filmed fighting an alligator. It was a battle so intense that both animals perished in the struggle. This massive loss of species creates a chain reaction. Fewer small mammals mean less food for native birds of prey like hawks and owls. Fewer scavengers mean decaying matter lingers, altering the very soil and water quality of the glades. The fight against them has been a long, losing battle. Officials first turned to the public, launching the Python Challenge in 2013. It was a massive media event, a call to arms for anyone brave enough to step into the swamp. There were cash prizes, public glory, and the thrill of the hunt. People came with airboats, machetes, and high-powered flashlights. But after weeks of effort, the combined haul totaled just 68 snakes. 68 out of tens of thousands. It was a PR stunt, not a solution. The state realized they were fighting a ghost that could hide in plain sight, sniffing out the silent enemy. They moved on to a more professional strategy called the Python Elimination Program. This wasn't a contest, it was a job. Paid licensed hunters began patrolling the levees at night, getting an hourly wage plus bonuses for every snake removed. But the math is brutal. It costs millions to pay contractors to hunt over a massive area that covers thousands of square miles. And for every snake they remove, 2 more seem to take its place. They even tried Judas snakes, which involves fitting female pythons with radio trackers to lead hunters to breeding grounds. It helped a little, but it wasn't enough. The Everglades was just too big for humans to search. The state realized brute force was a failing game. They needed a hunter that didn't use its eyes to find a camouflaged enemy. From paws to prototypes, when the bounty programs failed to make a dent, wildlife managers realized they needed a new kind of partner. They needed one that didn't rely on sight or luck, but on an ancient, powerful instinct. That is when Florida turned to an ally as old as humanity itself, the dog. In recent years, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission launched a small but daring experiment. 2 dogs trained like elite detectives would be sent into the swamps to do what humans could not: smell the invisible. Their names were Truman and Eleanor. Truman, a black Labrador, had the friendly face of a family pet. Eleanor, a Dutch Shepherd with sharp, alert eyes, was bred for precision and speed. For months, they were trained to recognize the faint, musky odor that Burmese pythons leave behind. This is a scent humans can't detect at all, but it lingers in the grass and mud long after the snake has passed. Once in the field, the results came fast. In their first few months, the duo helped capture several large snakes that had eluded human crews for weeks. Truman's tail would stiffen, and Eleanor would circle, nose low to the ground, and suddenly freeze. That was the universal sign that prey was near. Moments later, a handler's flashlight beam would catch the slow ripple of scales. These dogs were finding pythons in minutes where biologists had searched for hours. But as with everything in the Everglades, success came at a price. The swamp is a tough place to work. The heat is extreme, often topping 100 degrees Fahrenheit with crushing humidity. The dogs had to wear cooling vests and special boots to protect their paws from the sharp sawgrass that can cut like a razor. And of course, the area is full of other dangers like alligators and venomous cottonmouths. What many overlooked, however, was the real problem: scale. Truman and Eleanor were amazing, but they were only 2 dogs. The Everglades, remember, is 1.5 million acres. To cover that much ground, the state would need hundreds of dog teams, costing millions upon millions in training and support. It was a brilliant tool, but it wasn't the final solution everyone was praying for. However, this victory sparked a new and controversial question. The dogs proved that scent was the key to finding the snakes. So, what if the bait could attract the snakes to the hunters instead? This led scientists down an unsettling path that blurred the line between biology and desperation. They began small, controlled studies using live marsh rabbits, which are the python's natural prey. They built secure pens designed to protect the rabbits from any direct attack and placed them in high-traffic, swampy trails. The rabbits became living magnets. Within weeks, pythons began appearing, one after another slithering toward the enclosures. The principle was proven. Prey attraction worked, but the moral cost was high. The images of trembling live rabbits surrounded by giant constrictors sparked immediate outrage. Under immense public pressure, the funding for live bait trials was pulled, and the program was shut down. If they couldn't use live animals, they would have to build something better. Engineering the perfect lure. With the live bait program finished, engineers and biologists teamed up to create a mechanical solution. They had the blueprint. They knew exactly what a python wanted: the heat of a small mammal, the scent of its fur, and the slight twitch of life. So they started building. The project was called the Robo-Rabbit. Each decoy was a marvel of practical design, built from weather-resistant materials and coated in synthetic fur that felt real to the touch. Inside, a special thermal pad emitted a constant heat signature nearly identical to a living marsh rabbit's 99-degree body temperature. Tiny battery-powered emitters released a chemical compound that mimicked rabbit musk, a scent that could drift on the swamp breeze for hundreds of yards. Some models even had tiny motors to make their ears and nose twitch. They were, in effect, the perfect bait. Each one cost nearly $4,000 to build. Hidden within each unit was a motion-triggered camera and a transmitter. Whenever something slithered close, the system would activate, sending an instant alert to biologists stationed miles away. To power it all, they used small, efficient solar panels, allowing the robots to operate for weeks without human help. The plan was simple. They anchored 120 of these robotic rabbits inside protective pens in known python hotspots. The goal wasn't to harm the snakes directly, but to lure them into monitored zones where trained teams could move in and remove them safely. When the first units were deployed, no one knew if the snakes would fall for it. The first 2 days were a stunning success. The alerts started pinging almost immediately. Field cameras captured incredible footage of massive pythons, some over 15 feet long, approaching the decoys. They flicked their tongues, sensing the heat and the smell. Then they struck, coiling their massive bodies around the fake rabbits. The teams moved in and captured snake after snake. It was working better than anyone had dreamed. And then, day 3 happened. An alert came in from a decoy near a deep water canal. The biologist watching the live feed expected to see another python. Instead, the camera showed a dark log-like shape moving fast, a 12-foot alligator. The gator wasn't confused, it was drawn by the same sensory triggers. It saw a warm, struggling animal and heard the faint hum of the motors. In one violent explosion of water, the alligator charged the pen and crushed the $4,000 robot in a single bite. The robots, it turned out, were the perfect lure for everything in the swamp. The thing nobody tells you is that pythons and alligators are ancient enemies. They compete for food and territory every day. Now, humans had just dropped hundreds of flashing dinner bells all over their shared hunting grounds. What happened next was the insane part. A new predator war began. The alligators, learning that these were easy if unsatisfying meals, began hunting the robots. They destroyed dozens of them in a matter of days. The pythons, in turn, sensing the presence of the massive alligators, started avoiding the traps entirely. The expensive machines were being turned into scrap metal by the local wildlife, cracking the python social code. Scientists and officials were ready to pull the plug on the whole operation. The robotic rabbit army had failed, and millions of dollars were being crunched in the jaws of angry alligators. But a young data analyst on the team noticed something strange. The robots weren't just decoys. They were spies. Before being destroyed, each robot's motion sensor, thermal imager, and camera had recorded everything that passed by. They weren't just logging python attacks, they were logging every single movement in the area. They tracked the time of day, the exact temperature, and the direction of travel for every creature. What many overlooked was that by cross-referencing the data from all 120 units, especially the ones that weren't attacked, a pattern emerged. They built a digital three-dimensional map of the swamp's predator movements. And the data showed something they had never seen before. The pythons weren't just randomly slithering through the million-plus acres. They were using highways, specific hidden corridors in the water and sawgrass to move between hunting grounds. And the alligators used them too. This is where the story goes from strange to something out of a science fiction movie. It gets even crazier. The scientists took all that data, every twitch, every failed hunt, every robotic rabbit lost, and they fed it into a powerful learning AI. The AI started chewing on the numbers, looking for deep patterns humans could never see. And it found one. The AI began to predict not just where the pythons were, but where they would be at specific times. Why? Because it had learned exactly what the pythons feared. The AI figured out that the pythons were moving in precise, deliberate patterns to avoid their only natural predator, the alligators. The robots hadn't just found a few snakes, they had stumbled backward into something huge. They had accidentally mapped the pythons' entire secret social calendar. They had decoded their movements, their fears, and their hidden schedules. They had finally found the python's secret weakness. Armed with this new ghost map, the hunters got a new playbook. The entire strategy shifted overnight. No more sitting and waiting at decoy sites, hoping a snake would wander by. That was old news. Instead, they used the AI's pinpoint predictions to go on the offensive. They could intercept the snakes on their secret highways, the hidden routes they used when they thought nothing was watching. The results were immediate and staggering. They weren't finding one snake at a time, they were finding groups. The AI, by tracking the specific movements of the large, mature females, did the unthinkable. It led the hunters directly to the source. Could these AI maps finally save the Everglades, or are we missing a key detail about how these snakes adapt? What do you think? Like and subscribe for more insane stories.